Welcome! It has been a wonderful summer of spinning, but now that the temperatures are beginning to drop and we're getting a little cooler in the daytime, and especially anticipating those cooler nights, I find myself, as I have many times over the last 30 years, being drawn to doing other types of crafts this time of year. Cozy quilts especially have always been a passion of mine. I love sitting down under a quilt that I'm working on and doing some handwork, as I am doing now. The project I'm working on today is one that I've been working on since last winter. It's one of 4 panels that have the seasons depicted in dancing girls. I'll be showing more of these in a later video, but for today what I wanted to show was what I have been doing in preparation for Halloween. After having watched on some other YouTube videos discussion of vintage Halloween, I decided I wanted to participate in some vintage Halloween as well. Sadly, all my vintage Halloween costume patterns are for little tiny kids, and I don't really necessarily need a costume for myself. There's a cat. The best laid plans are always interrupted by a cat. This is Callie. She's one of our 2 fur babies that run around this house, and she causes trouble. She doesn't like to be on camera, but she does like this chair, and she thinks I need to vacate it. But before I do that, let me show you the project I want to show off today. My vintage Halloween costume in doll form, Little Miss Red Riding Hood. I have been wanting to make doll clothes for these dolls for a very long time, but one thing or another has always prevented me from getting into the sewing room. And this time I chose to push through the different kind of things that usually stop me, and I made Little Miss Red Riding Hood. Now, she is decked out in quite the costume, including machine embroidery appliques. But before we take much look at her from here, how about we go back and see some of the process that I went through to make it, keeping in mind that all of this videoing and sewing is really new to me. I've had to figure a few things out, like how to keep the light on my sewing machine from flickering, and how to get my hands in front of the camera while I'm hand sewing, or keep the sewing project in the camera's view rather than just my hands, my elbows, whatever. So I hope that you enjoy Little Miss Red Riding Hood, the process of making her. It was fun. I am so thrilled. I hope that you will enjoy this. I began by marking all of the notches and match points of the pattern. This was especially important since I was using solid fabrics that had no discernible right or wrong sides. Later, these marks helped me keep track of what was the right and wrong side. It's important to remember to double check your pattern pieces before you cut them out. I ended up cutting out pinafore pattern bodices rather than dress pattern bodices. I eventually figured it out and changed it. This bodice had a lining. I love a lining when it comes to adding a collar. It makes things a lot easier. I didn't have any pre-made black lace that I could use for this project, so I went to the embroidery machine and stitched out some little lace appliques that I could use on the dress. I decided to hand sew these on
leaving the water-soluble stabilizer in place until after I was done hand sewing them. The ruffle was 3 times the length of the skirt itself. There was a lot of pinning that needed to be done. I decided that the collar needed some beads. It took me 3 different tries to figure out a design that I was happy with. I was not looking forward to the sleeves, but in the end it actually was a lot easier than I expected. With the sleeves done, it was just a matter of sewing the bodice to the skirt and then removing all the random threads and gathering stitches and other debris that had accumulated while I sewed. Finally, I ended up sewing on a couple snaps on the sleeves and at the neck, and I was ready to move on to the cape. Since I was going to use a stretchy fabric for the coat, or as I keep calling it, the cape, I decided to go ahead and bond an interfacing to the wrong side of the fabric before cutting out the pattern pieces. I then used a simple black cotton for the lining. Construction for the cape was much more straightforward than the dress. The only tricky part was in dealing with the finishing of the sleeves. I really recommend hand sewing the 2 layers together before going to the sewing machine and top stitching. I left the pins in when it came time to do the top stitching because it actually kept the fabric a little bit more in place and it was a better final look. The final thing I did is I took some tack stitches where the hood and the shoulder seams meet and where the hood itself has the back seam. By tacking these 3 areas, the lining of the hood stays in place.
And so now we're back. And here's little Miss. There's one more thing I want to do for her dress, but the ribbon hasn't come. I discovered after having made it that the heaviness of the lace and the heaviness of the ruffle tends to wrinkle the fabric here. And I have some satin ribbon coming that I'm going to stitch down to fill that area to see if I can stabilize it. It may go on top, it may also just be stitched under. But either way, if I were to do this again, I would probably do some sort of stabilization to the fabric in order for it to hold up to the weight. I hope you have enjoyed this unwinding with me this week, and I hope I will be seeing you again soon. Maybe I'll even speak to the camera again. Enjoy.